what's happening is what I'm calling the accordion effect. So if you go away from with one thing from this lecture, it's probably the accordion effect. So like the bellows of the accordion, what is happening is as we go through the fall, you actually go further away, the dimensions get further away, and then they get back again. So we are headed now to 2012, and what I think is going to happen is the veils are going to get thin again, and everyone keeps talking about the return of the gods. Well, this is how it's happening. In my book, as I said, the book is a work in progress. I really do want to work out the mathematics of this and get this out there so that, you know, the actual equations are there for how this accordion effect is happening, because it's all to do with geometry. You know, so that if you look deeply into sort of even Pythagoras' theorem, you know, it's all a microcosm of the macrocosm of what's actually happening. So I think, you know, this is what's happening. The fall, you've got the dimensions together, the gods were apparent, and then, you know, before the fall, the golden age, and then they were interacting with humans. They weren't physical. This is why we don't get any archaeological evidence, because they weren't actually physical. You can't go on a dig and get them. So Zahi Hawass is sitting there going, I believe it if I found the remains. You're not going to find the remains, but it doesn't make them less real. The ancient people were not hallucinating. This is what's happening. You've got the great year cycle, and as you go away, we go into the dark age, and the veils become very thick. You can no longer see the gods, but it doesn't make them any less present. And in fact, they've been with us the whole time. These dimensions are with us the whole time. In 2012, I think what's probably going to happen is the veils get very thin, time behaves in a different way, and we're going back to that era where everybody will be able to start interacting again with these different dimensions. Sound exciting? Yeah. Makes your bank balance seem a bit less troublesome, doesn't it? Okay. All right, so going back to the Old Testament, we can look at it in a different way, because don't forget, when you pick up your Old Testament, you're getting an English translation. Okay, and if you look at the original Greek and then the Hebrew and all the, because we've got it from Greek, you will see that different words are being used for God in different situations, and there's a whole theory on this, the J, the P, the source, and everything. So, but where we have the word Lord or God, sometimes, if you go back to the Hebrew, it'll say something like Elohim. It'll have a plural word. Okay, and it means not just one being, it means several beings. But we often get the translation of a singular. And of course, the Jewish scribes, after the Babylonian exile, were very, very keen to try and make out that there was just one God all along. Sorry, are you asking a question? Are you okay? Okay. So is this making sense to people? Yeah, okay. So in the Old Testament, you actually see that indeed God is present and corporeal, and sometimes multiple. So and different words, as I said, translation as well. And he also says he's a jealous God. Very clearly, I'm a jealous God. And it's like, why would a concept or, you know, something that omnipresent be jealous? You know, this is obviously something that is, more anthropomorphic than, than the concepts of God in Buddhism, for example. You know, so, and often is accompanied by glowing or fire. Now, I think that glowing or fire, anyone see a UFO? Has anyone seen a UFO? No? Often accompanied by these UFO sightings as an orange glow. Okay, now I think what's happening is as something makes its way through the dimensions, you actually see a fire or a glow associated with it. And if you look at a lot of the stories in the Old Testament, they have that sort of glow or fire associated with it. It's a dimensional process of something being visible from this dimension from a different dimension. Does that make sense? So that's where the glow and the fire comes from. And so in the Old Testament, you can see the fall happening. At first, God appears on the mercy seat and talks to the Jews in exile and on the Ark of the Covenant. And then gradually, There's less of an appearance, doesn't appear on the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant disappeared. There's a whole other lecture. I do go into it in my book, I promise you. You can see the fall happening, and that people are getting further and further away from. And the same, I've gone into the Old Testament, but you see the same sort of thing in every culture, so I've just focused on that. So, Abraham, the patriarch, this is a sort of depiction, they put angels there. But if you read the story of Abraham, he gets visited by 3 men, they say, in the Bible. 3 men. And then suddenly, a few passages later in the English translation, the 3 men become God, just one. That's the trouble that we get, But interestingly, Abraham washes the feet of these 3 men. They're obviously close enough, these gods, to actually touch, feel, and everything like that. And even more hilariously, these sort of beings come along and say to Sarah, his wife, has everybody read this sort of, you're going to have a baby? And to paraphrase, and at this point she starts laughing. Yeah, right, I'm going to have a baby. And God says, you're laughing at me? You laughing at me? Don't you trust that I can do whatever? And Sarah says, no, I wasn't laughing. And Abraham, being such a nice husband, said, yeah, you were laughing, Sarah. You were. So, you can have these sorts of exchanges with God. In the Old Testament, it's a very sort of present, real thing. So they're actual beings interdimensional. And, just as, on Mount Sinai, anybody reading that description from a modern perspective would go, that's thunder and clapping of God ascending on Mount Sinai. And there's other examples of this in the Bible. It just sounds like a UFO to us, or of some sort of craft. So I just couldn't resist putting this in. But just an aside, one of the things I will go into in the book is that Moses does parts the waves, the Red Sea, Reed Sea, or whatever you want to, and a lot of the Egyptian magicians, this is one of the things that they were known to do, and Manetho and other people actually write that Moses was an Egyptian magician, so he would have known the sort of tricks that the sort of things that they were known to do. There was one I saw, I can't remember which pharaoh, where the magician parts ways to find the necklace of one of the ladies of the court who dropped it into the sea. So, this is something that Egyptian magicians were known for. And I just had to put that in there. So, I don't know if people know this, but there were actually 10 amendments. Do you read? There were actually 2, because of course Moses comes down from Mount Sinai and he breaks the tablets because he gets annoyed that Aaron's tribe were worshipping a calf. And he goes back up again. But what it actually says is God wrote these tablets in his own hand. Very, very, physical sort of beings. But, I mean, of course, they weren't physical. It's just the veils were thin. And, of course, this can sort of explain the flood. Now, the flood, people are now, I think, accepting that the flood actually happened. It's not been like that. But it wasn't caused by ice caps melting. People think that it's actually an interdimensional process. I'm doing some more work on the scientific basis on this. But black hole principle, what you notice is that when you have black holes, which is otherwise known as terrestrial gamma ray flashes, thunderstorms, you get rain. So there's something about the black hole process which produces water. And water is not just water that we know that's this wet stuff in this dimension. The ancient people, and it's logical that water exists in many dimensions. And when you get extremes of polarity, such as, I think, the pole shifts, you get water coming out of those dimensions and into this one. Geologists have studied it, and they found there was not enough ice here to cause a massive flood very quickly. It just doesn't make any sense from a scientific perspective. But if you are going into the interdimensional science, you realise that this is the flood is actually the dimension splitting. But in some of the text, of course, it says, I'll come back to that later. The flood was created because all these beings were creating havoc. Okay, So there's lots and lots of different examples of all these beings and what happened to them. They started interbreeding with humans, and there's actually a mention of that in the Bible, which is a very famous passage. Has everybody heard of this bit in Genesis? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Yeah? Okay. Just in case people... It's always a bit quiet. Talk of giants set in several places in the Bible. So again, it seems that, why would they be talking about these giants if they didn't exist? So there's all of that going on. And this is me in Mexico finding another example of giants. Okay, it can't be any more obvious what this site is about. We've got a stele here, and we have the interpretation. Somebody's done the outline, and you can clearly see this is all about giants. This is the second one that we have seen, and there's the people here, and then there's the giant energy here. So yeah, absolutely, very, very clear. So could you see that giant on there? So it's all over the world. And, there's another example of the sort of characteristics of these beings. In the Book of Enoch, has everybody heard of that? Or, yeah? No, some of you not. Okay, that's what's known as an apocryphal text. And there were quite a few copies of it found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So at the time of Jesus, this was a very important text, but it was since banned by the church, and it was rediscovered partly in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but also in Ethiopia. And Ethiopia that had had kept this knowledge alive. Very strange text where the patriarch Enoch, who I think is Noah's grandfather, or great-grandfather, actually was visited several times by beings at his bed, what we would call an alien abduction, I suppose. And he gets taken up to all these different heavens, and he ends up ascending, actually, at the end of that. But the other thing it describes is these fallen angels, and sorry, this is rather a dramatic film, but these angels who actually came down to earth, and so I'll just...
The Book of Enoch offers disturbing vision of the fall of the angels who lust after earthly women.
And they began to go into them and to defile themselves with them, and they taught them charms and enchantments. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants whose height was 3,000 ells. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind.
That these angels have crossed over this boundary that they shouldn't have. They were spiritual beings, and they were to remain as such. When they decided to descend upon earth, this unleashed upon the earth all sorts of problems. Not only these giants who are bloodthirsty and violent, but also these angels went on to teach humankind a variety of forbidden crafts. They also taught human beings how to make weapons of war.
Very strange text, but again you've got the same themes about interbreeding with humans, and this is like an apocryphal biblical text.